So, everybody, first off, thank you for having me. I think a lot of you know who I am. For those who don't, my name is Steve Worth. I'm actually a senior consulting engineer with Dell EMC. And so I can start off the evening nicely. Forgive me that I'm going to do 2 minutes of what is commonly referred to as advertising, but it's only because of the fact I get 2 questions I'm about to answer all the time, and I just can get them over with now versus later. First question is, we hit all the time nowadays, is so what the heck is Dell Technologies? And simply put, when Dell bought EMC back last fall, EMC had already kind of partitioned itself up into a number of different companies, some that are internal and logically aligned and others that are separate and strategically aligned. But with the merger done, we've now kind of formulated ourselves underneath the 7 brands that you see here. Some hopefully you know, some you may not know. But, simply put, the way to understand it is that Dell, the original Dell logo you see on the side, remains the overall brand for Dell Technologies, big entity, and for Dell's Client Services division, which sells all the nice laptops and PCs you're used to using. Dell EMC, which is where I'm from, is essentially the remains. That doesn't sound right. Is what was EMC. We continue to push and sell both servers, hyper-converged, converged infrastructure, and all the storage that you're familiar with us from the past. Pivotal is a rather new company that started only a couple of years ago. It originally was Pivotal Labs that used to do a lot of analytics and Hadoop-based processing. Over the last couple of years, we've readjusted it to where they're now focused on deploying cloud development tools and technologies designed to allow applications to scale out immediately from birth rather than having to be retrofitted from the kind of client-server model we're all used to working in a cloud-oriented world. RSA and SecureWorks are the 2 security arms of the company. SecureWorks actually comes from legacy Dell, and they do a lot of security-based deployment and so forth on hire for customers. RSA tends to focus on endpoint and multi-factor key encryption and a lot of the security stuff we put inside of our software for our storage system. VirtuStream is a rather newer company that is actually a cloud services company that provides enterprise-class cloud-based services that can tie to both public, hybrid, and other clouds with guaranteed performance response levels. And then finally, I think everybody in the room should recognize VMware, so I won't go into explaining one of our acquisitions from long ago. So that was question 1. Second question I got is, why should I care? And the answer is, I don't know if you should, but we've been kind of harping on the fact that with the merger done, Dell Technologies is the largest private Dell technology company in the world. I'm not quite sure how you count all that, but this is the way they do it, so I will stand by the corporate mission statement. And at any rate, we are who we are, we're around, and we're in a lot of things. So that said, I'll move to the talk for tonight. So the first couple of minutes of this, I think some of you have seen before. I apologize for having to repeat a little bit of this, but I found it useful to explain what we are doing here and why we care, what got us started into this. I do come from the world of data storage, and as Dell EMC, or what was EMC, did, we have been working hard for the last 4 or 5 years and push and sell very successfully the concept of data lakes. We essentially take our large object store platforms, even some of our larger NFS-style storage platforms, we can combine them together and we can build these very large data repositories on multi-architecture systems. And when we sell it to you, we sell you on this picture. But when we talk to real customers who deploy this stuff, they tell us this is what they make. Essentially a data wasteland, if you will. And it unfortunately is a problem that obviously grows as the amount of data grows. In fact, to give all of you a little bit of context, I started this from the world of genomics. This is the people that I was working with when I got engaged in all of this work with metadata. And there is a common belief amongst genomic research scientists that in order to get the kind of baselines that everybody really wants for different genome baselines based upon ethnicity, population regions, and so forth, they need to sequence about 5% of the world population. Well, to look at this from the eyes of a storage person, if you take that 5%, kind of map it out against data that's easily obtained, which is the number of people in the United States and the EU, you quickly discover, oh, we're looking at roughly 71 million people who need to be sequenced. Each sequence file is easily over 100 gigabytes. It's now quickly approaching 200 gigabytes. You do the back math, it's roughly 20 exabytes. At 1 penny a gigabyte, which was the number a couple of months ago for the cheapest cold storage you can find in the cloud, you're looking at roughly $2.8 billion a year to hold copy number 1. It's starting to get a lot of people's attention, and in fact, it's actually, from my world, starting to create a number of very weird behaviors that we're seeing in real customers. The first of these is we're having encountered many of our customers who, against our best advice, are literally burning their data out to create room. They just don't want to spend any more money. They're throwing it away. Some of it, I hope, is not valuable to them. We'll find out as time goes by. There were even a few that I met at BioIT World last year who told me, flat out admitted, over an adult beverage, that they're down to keeping only 1 copy. They try their best to protect it very, very well, but they're not making backups anymore because this has gotten to be too expensive for them. And my favorite one is the new ploy that we're starting to see folks do, which is, oh, I have this nice repository of information you want. I'm going to put an API package around it so you have to go through my APIs to get to it. Thinking down the road, yeah, well, maybe we'll charge you a small service fee, to help cut our costs. I don't disagree with anybody doing this, but I mean, it just kind of shows you the behavior we see out from the commercial side of things. There are many people who believe flat out that, this kind of management of large-scale data sets and large amounts of data can easily be handled with machine-generated metadata. And I'm not going to pretend with anybody, my company is one of the big ones in this, right? We have things like our Analytics Insight module where we can deploy it against a hybrid cloud or a public cloud or whatever, and we can help you discover and analyze and create data sets that will actually feed into an enterprise hybrid cloud that will let you do ad hoc data analytics until you're ready to screen. And we have people who buy this stuff at rather large price tags, to be quite honest. But I unfortunately come from the line of people, as do many others, who realize that that may not be the full answer. There are a number of problems in the world that really require human context to be applied to data in order to fully leverage its capability. And I have kept and used for a couple of years this slide out of a research paper I found out of SUNY up in New York from some marine biologists who had been studying mullet shells here on the east coast of the U.S., who were writing in this particular article about the fact that they don't really know where all these colorations and radial lines and so forth come from. They were speculating that they might be environmental conditions, they might be depth, water temperature. In fact, one of the parts of the article, they even suggested that perhaps the width of some of those radial lines had to do with the kind of ecosystem shock the shells had seen over their lifetime, and even speculated that the coloration may change as the shell ages. So, in other words, it might be very light, kind of pink now, but as later in life, it might be like the one up in the upper right. Now, you would say, well, I can certainly put this in the machine-generated form by taking a bunch of pictures and putting the pictures away into a database, but somehow that just still doesn't supply the user context of the person who found the information, where it came from, what the environment was like around the shell, so forth and so on. And so when you look at this, you kind of think to yourself, well, if we're really going to get full leverage of data, particularly as we keep it and hold it for long periods of time, we need additional amounts of information to go along with it. Now, I realize everybody in this room I'm looking at, you all have bought into this a long time ago, but this kind of gives you the context of where we come from with this. And if you're not convinced with that, let me remind you, this problem is only going to get tens and 20s of times worse in very short order. We've done and paid for a number of studies through the years that say that roughly today we have about 6 zettabytes of information across the world right now that's digitized. It's easily going to pass the 40 zettabyte mark in under 4 years. Actually, almost 3 years now. We're in 2017. I'm changing my number counting. And then you add on to this, if you watched a lot of what occurred back in late summer of last year, there was a whole slew of articles that came out from a number of different research groups that are clearly showing that they can now use effectively synthetic DNA to hold massive amounts of data in literally a drop of water like you see at the end of that test tube. The particular paper this came from demonstrated the ability to hold 1 exabyte of data that they could both store and retrieve with accuracy, well over 9 nines out of that one little drop of water. Now, and you think about this, if I can do it now, it isn't probably 10, maybe 15 years before this is commercial-based technology. And when that occurs, 40 zettabytes is going to be nothing compared to the exabytes that could be put away from there. Now, that all sounds wonderful. It means storage will be cheap. It's easily available. But how to keep up with it becomes very important. And this is how I typically make the point about the value of metadata. If you think about this, and particularly if you're holding really large data sets that cost you a lot of money to keep, if you want to share them around, sending everybody a copy, like we are here in the room, gets to be very expensive quickly. And we think it's storage costs. It's not. Networking costs are almost 3 to 4x the cost of storage right now. Just moving the data down the wire costs you a good deal more money than holding the piece of information on some form of storage media. This implies that the use of all this user-defined metadata that tools like iRODS holds can become a very effective way of letting people share descriptions of the information that they want without necessarily having to ship it around from place to place to place. And there are plenty of companies that have already started getting engaged in this. I won't go into this because everybody I know that's in this room has had contact with one or more of these companies over the last few years. But when we got into looking at this problem and went through those companies plus about 20 more, we ended up coming and wanting to get involved with iRODS, mostly because, not the fact that it's a great archival storage capability, but there were 4 characteristics of iRODS implementation that are really compelling around user-defined metadata. I list them over here. In fact, let me get out of the way. The folks on the left side of the room here, I'll go to the right. But those items are, as you all know, first off, data virtualization. iRODS is highly attuned to keeping data for extremely long periods of time. Some of your customers I've met at the user group meetings just think in hundreds of years, not 10 or 20. The ability to have the metadata potentially grow at an independent rate and performance of the actual data store is a very compelling idea. And add on to that the fact that all this metadata can both be API used by other utilities and work with in other ways, makes this a very compelling and interesting idea as it evolves forward. And for those of you who work with me, you've noticed through the last couple of years I'm always pushing on how to make the metadata operations more interesting and more useful, because that's where I think the key is. However, when we got into looking at this, we did discover we had a number of customers who buy our product who were heavy iRODS users. And to one of them, they all tell us the same thing. Wonderful piece of software if you're a programmer. We're a little hesitant on rolling it out to our non-programmers because they get scared. That's the way they usually put it. iRODS is not for the faint of heart. And yet the people who want to use it, when we talk to them, they tell us consistently, I want this to be a tool. I don't want to know how it works. I don't want to know how to program it. I just want it to work. So we started cooking up the idea of trying to find a way to make this easier to work with, which is what led us to Metalnx, the focus of the talk this evening. And from our point of view, we've looked at this totally on how to simplify it so it's easier for new potential customers of both ours and the consortia to pick up and use iRODS. In particular, we tried to focus on making it a little bit easier to do administration of the grid. We have focused on trying to do automation that allows the extraction at ingest time of metadata. Many of you are doing this now, but we were in there as well. We focused predominantly on genomic metadata for the time being, but the idea can easily be extended to others. We've built a concept of our own of metadata templates, which is a basis for being able to apply consistent metadata across groups of files. And then finally, a fairly simple searching interface to help let you look both for metadata tags as well as for file properties and other things that are buried inside of the iCat. So simply put, what we're thinking about is how to make this simple and easy to use. And rather than going through a bunch of slides on this, I'm actually going to try and show you a little bit of a live demo here in a moment. But before I do, please like to make sure you understand the environment you're going to see. First off, be aware it's a virtual machine environment running on this little laptop, so do be tolerant if it pauses periodically. 3 virtual machines on an old laptop, not the world's best environment. But the concept's pretty simple. We have set up a 2-node iROD grid. I'm going to be running with iRODS 4.1.10 rather than 4.2. I haven't upgraded yet. And we're running our Metalnx application on a 3rd server with our own little small Postgres database underneath it. We do try to keep up with some per user information. There's nothing about this alignment that says it can't run Metalnx can run back in the grid, it can run on the same servers, it can run in other places, it can be deployed multiple times for scale out, and nothing special about it from that point of view. We use a lot of the same principles you do in iRODS about letting things be reconfigured and pointing back to other places if you so desire. And I think with that, I'll stop, go into the demo. By the way, if anybody does have a question, you don't have to wait to the end, just interject along the way. And forgive me, I have to jump out of this.
Can I ask a question? Are you sort of contemplating how this might be used across collaborators? You know what I'm saying, in terms of federations and doing data control at remote locations?
Yes, that is an area that we've done a little bit of experimenting with. I will be honest and upfront, knowing that you all were doing a lot of work with Federation, both in the last upgrade to 4.2 and going into the future. I've kind of held back because we don't see that many customers we interact with looking to build federations yet.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Yeah, most of them right now are still kicking the tires on what I will call centralized, typically 5 or 6 resource node kind of scale outs. Most everybody that we're trying to get involved is a new customer or at our stage.
Can I ask one more use case question? Is like how much of staging of data before, the whole idea of breaking things up into landing areas and doing metadata extraction in the landing area, or, sort of breaking up the grid into sort of functional pieces like that? Is that something that's risen?
Yeah, you'll see that more and more. I mean, I know you all are kind of biased by what you've seen at Sanger Labs over the last few years, but my experience in talking to folks that we encounter who are looking to potentially deploy iRODS, they think along the same lines, that invariably what they end up concentrating on is the workflow between where I get the data, I ingest it, how it's going to be manipulated to a final result, and then how it's going to be archived. And so the idea of creating either zones or even using resource servers to do particular types of actions and move the workflow along is in the minds of the administrators we talk to, because of the fact they're going to have to build a rule system to go make it happen. That, or based on one like the folks from Bio Team who were here last time, doing similar kinds of things. So, how that will evolve over time, I can make some speculations on. I think you're going to find that more and more folks are going to want using Federation as they get more comfortable now that you all have the software much more hardened than it used to be. But, I'll point to the whole group. I mean, there's a bunch of you are putting all kinds of things together here. But I think that will evolve as time goes by. Just not quite to the point of seeing it being operational yet. So from our point of view, Mike, do you have another question you wanted to ask?
No, those are great answers.
Pardon me a second. Let me see if I can blow this up a little bit. It shows reasonably well. So the idea behind Metalnx is that we, as iRODS does, try to stay as pure to it as we can. So there's the 2 classes of users, RODS admin and RODS users. If you come in as a RODS admin, as I've done on this plugin, which would bring you to our dashboard page where we have done some work to try and monitor the state of the grid. We actually wrote some of this software before Zone Report was done, and we could leverage into that. We actually looked a little bit deeper as to whether the actual server has got its shares in place, whether its network is working, these kinds of things, particularly looking for hung servers, if you will, kind of mentality. So we have a status indicator here that allows drill down by individual servers. We put together a map of what the storage resource pool looks like. We found a lot of folks that we had encountered tell us they get confused about where the different storage resources are. So this gives them a fairly nice way to come in and drill down and see the info about what the individual storage resources are if they need it. Then, of course, an overall indicator of storage usage, some quick links to different basic functions such as user account, group account management. And one of the things that we are just about to roll out with the next update we're doing, we had found that a number of customers we had were finding it difficult to remember to deploy microservices that they wanted to use to all the different servers in the grid, particularly the ones we were providing. So we finally got tired of answering the questions and did a little bit of work with some rules to where we're now tracking whether or not you've actually installed all of our microservices in the right place, and we're listing the ones that come with iRODS as standard now, and we'll list the others. But my hope is to possibly work with some of y'all in the not-too-distant future without coming up with a way to let a rule label itself, so it's easy to dissect apart where they're at, where they are, and kind of look to make sure they're in the right places on a grid. Something we can discuss in the future. But, I was solving an immediate problem that was causing us pain, but I think it's extendable to other folks once it's into open source. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks we can talk about that. Pardon me, I don't mean to digress into futures here just yet. But, user account management, kind of a similar thing. User accounts can be created in terms of creating an account. I'll give you a quick look into what one appears to be. Basic username, type information. We have the ability to let you go ahead and add a person to groups at this stage, as well as giving them individual permissions, either by groups or by individual files into different parts of the grid should they need to. And one of the other things that we do also, one of the other things that we also did at the request of some of the early customers we talked to, I don't have it defined. I'll explain it. We also put into this the ability to create what we call a user profile, meaning that you can go create a, if you will, a class, if you will, at a high-level structure that defines for this type of user. They will automatically be attached to these groups. They'll be given permissions for these files and so forth. And so when you create them, you don't have to come in and click all this lower-level stuff. You can set up the basic account information, pick from one of the profiles that have been predefined, hit save, and it's all done. One of the other things we did do with this, for those who are interested, we've also, in the release we've made, added tools and scripts that we've developed that will allow you to either create, if you will, a spreadsheet list of users to have automatic accounts created, or let you go into something like LDAP and create a arbitrary group, if you will, and then we can extract directly from the group and create all the iRODS linkages back through PAM to LDAP. So we tried to help automate some of that process to make it easier for customers to deploy things. Group management, roughly the same kind of idea. Groups can be defined within an individual group. It can also add the users and so forth and set some amount of permissions. And resource management is also likewise straightforward. You can define from here the different resources, pick the classes of resources that you want. Pardon me, I would do this, but I'm scared that I will mess something up. But it's the same kind of thing. You pick the resource name, pick the type of resource, whether it's a regular resource or a compound resource, and then enter in the rest of the information. The menu screen, of course, will change based upon what type of resource it is. It's a direct equivalent, you know, to make and modify resource commands that are in iRODS.
How are you getting the list of resource types?
We have some specific queries that are going off and asking all the appropriate questions. Metalnx itself is developed in 2 layers. There is, if you look into the code that's down in open source, you'll find that we essentially have a services layer that tries to virtualize every tie-in back to iRODS, so that as you all change, all we would have to do would be to play that particular layer, and then it in turn reports to the user UI layer that talks to your browser. That way we tried to be able to keep this interface as consistent as possible without having to muck with it all the time. If you're a regular user and you connect in, you could basically come to the collection screen at your iRODS home directory. As you can kind of see here from my account Metalnx, you'll see the files that are available. You can take actions on them as you wish, but to kind of make the demo go nicely, I'm going to come down to a lower level collection. I'm going to go pick up a few files. And please forgive me, we decided to use photographs because we were developing. They have a lot of metadata. They're small and fast, and it makes our test scripts run up a lot quicker than the 5 gigabyte files that a lot of people play with. But I will bring a few files in. From the interface, we can, of course, pick whichever resource we want it to go on. We can add checksums, which are quite regular, and you can even pick to do replication right here on the spot as you're bringing a file in. When we start an upload, we might notice we popped up another tab. We realized that in many cases, forgive me, there's actually, oh yes, it is showing up there. We pop up another tab because we realized that in many cases the uploads could potentially be longer, take a long time, and since this is a browser, we have to hold the session up. So what we did is basically put up a little queuing mark up here that will let you go in and see. And you actually can, if you have enough files and you're willing to watch, you can watch it updating all the little things as it goes through. But One of the new improvements that we've put in with this is that we monitor each file and report by color coding whether we were able to not only bring the file in and upload it, but whether or not we were able to extract successfully the metadata in it when we try to call our rules. If you can't hit one of the rules, it'll mark it for you. If the file can't be uploaded, it'll turn it to a red color code. But with files in place, we can then begin to drill in on an individual file and take a look at what's in there. As you can see from this, we have the two replicas that we asked for on each one of the files. I can delete them independently if I wish to. I can also go in and take a look at the individual metadata tags that were pulled in to the file. I'll scroll this out so you can see a little bit more of it. They're standard ADU format like we're used to with text and so forth. If you wish to add a tag, and I will do so, we can pick an individual tag, put a value in it. Spelled landscape correct this time, that's good. And then, of course, if you scroll back through, you'll see that the metadata tag is actually down here in the middle of the file. In fact, there are two orientation tags. The 256 value here came from the original camera this was taken on. You can, of course, edit or delete tags as you so wish. For example, if I wish to edit this tag, say maybe change the flash level to 9, I can do so, and that change is taken and put back into the iCap. Right, scrolled a little too fast, and you'll see there it's been changed and modified. One of the things that we found from talking to users that we know that are either already using or we're looking at using iRODS is that they're very worried about how to apply consistent metadata, which led us into this first implementation of how to work with templates. And for those of you who are actually in DSC and so forth, Mike, I know what y'all been developing is a bit more advanced than what we have right here. I've been looking at how to do this as a more flexible system. Y'all have been looking at it to do more around ontology mapping type of function.
And well, the trick will be if what we're tossing around does not suit what you are doing or is incompatible.
I'll get into that if we have time a little bit later.
Yeah.
I'm to the point where I'm waiting to see what Rick's been doing because there may be an easy marriage to make here now.
Well, and that should always be the goal.
So at any rate, but from our original concept, what folks told us they needed to do was to be able to define metadata tags and have them applied in a reasonably consistent fashion. So in our world, we just created a very simple concept where the metadata template as we have it is effectively in the minds of most programmers a script. You essentially are applying attributes. You can put in default values for the value or the unit if you so desire, save them away, and then this template becomes available for use. You can also make it public or private depending upon whether you want to keep it for yourselves or make it available for everybody to use. When you're ready to use it, though, you come to a point somewhere in the collection tree where you need to do some operation. And let's get back to my directory here. I will pick several files. In fact, I'll just grab the first three that are here. Select the action that I want to do, which is apply a template. I can select from a list of templates that are here, and yes, we've done the testing. This paginates, it'll hold hundreds and so forth and so on. I don't do that in these demos because everybody gets lost very quickly, but it will then bring up a screen, as you see here, where I can change any of the values that I might so list. For example, the location, I keep set at Raleigh, but tonight we're in Chapel Hill, so we'll change that, save the template, or should say apply the template. And in the background, what it's doing is going through and bringing open each file and adding all these tags to each one. If a tag is already there, we do not attempt to override it. We just do not mark it as an error. And when I say it's there, I mean it matches attribute, value, unit kind of comparison. If it's not there, it gets added. If something does blow up along the way and we get an error back from iRODS about doing the effective iMeta operation underneath, we, of course, flag the error and bring it up. But when finished, we can now go in and take a look at any one of the files we just touched. We'll go and scan the metadata. And as I scroll further down here, we will find location, and you'll see it now is there, and it says Chapel Hill. And that will be consistent across all the files that we touched in this operation. The other thing that we got a lot of feedback on from individuals was also in the area of searching. They wanted to be able to kind of search based upon tag and tag names, which most researchers tell us they do know. I thought really they needed a browser, but we've kind of learned, no, that's not a requirement, at least not yet. So If we, for example, wanted to look for the orientation tag that I put in here a few minutes ago, I spelled that right, but just out of curiosity, how many orientation tags are there? I can just come to a generalized search of this fashion. And we, of course, as you all who use iRODS know, we're doing the SQL search in the background. And when it comes up, what we'll get is essentially Google style match, where we'll indicate by top of order list which files hit the tags most frequently. For the tags that I own, as you'll see here, they are all highlighted. I can drill down to go see the metadata or set or change permissions on the files. For tag or files and objects that I don't have permissions to, we list them here along with who the owner is, but we will not give you access to any other information. So this becomes, in fact, it was kind of weird. We felt this was a bit of a security risk, but as we talked to researchers, they told us, no, this is necessary for us to do our jobs. So, we bowed and saluted the flag and moved on, so to speak.
You have to turn strict apples off to get that listing for the metadata?
No.
No, metadata is always available. Metadata is available to everybody.
This, of course, leads to why I continually fuss at you all about the fact we need ACLs on metadata, but at the moment I'm taking advantage of it.
Can you search on file size and metadata?
Yeah, it's a little bit trickier, Terrell, because if you don't know kind of what you're looking for, but I mean, an easy search that I tend to do because I can remember how to do this is, I can, for example, look for a resource name as a simple one. Using the default demo resource as an indicator. It will scan through and find all the files that are actually stored on the demo resource.
But it's not using the stuff from the other tab at the same time?
No.
Okay.
And we've talked and thought a lot about that. And
it's hard.
No, well, that's not really. It's not as hard as it seems. This is still a SQL query underneath.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Reagan. You were about to say something.
Can I get a list of files ordered by the value of a metadata attribute?
Not without doing what Terrell just described. It is certainly doable. The reason that we didn't was not that I wasn't interested, but again, as we kept talking to people, they kept telling us, system admins, deal with the files. I just want to deal with the metadata, so we decided to keep the world simple. But there is nothing that wouldn't allow this to be tied back in. The query is a builder underneath in our services layer that builds the query up and then sends a specific query to go do it. Do you all see need for that on a regular basis?
Oh yeah.
Sure.
And different. What we're looking at it. Well, no. Yes. The answer is yes. And especially that's the whole idea of virtual collections, is also to be able to turn those into folders visible to the user. So even in a department, you could prepare queries of different kinds, and to users, they click on them and they operate as if they're folders, but they could be collections that are taken from different zones even, right? That sort of thing, I think, is where it gets really interesting.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you. I mean, it's certainly something that's doable. We haven't really looked too much at the virtual collection. I'll be honest, and the customers that I interact with right now, getting them to understand this is still a challenge.
Yes.
So, and I don't mean that to be an insult to them, but they just are not to the point they're ready to think in that line relative to what they're doing.
Yeah, NSF gets really excited about like multidisciplinary collaboration, so that's where that sort of thing, I think, sells.
Well, a virtual collection kind of concept is a fairly easy thing to add on to this, because we would put it together basically the same way we do a template. So the moment I'm stuffing them in our Metalnx database, there's nothing special about it. It can go back as a table into the iRODS from that point of view. So,
do you see Metalnx used much on ingest, or is it mostly curation?
at this point, we're seeing it mostly on archival ingest and curation
Ingest,
data.
okay.
The two biggest users that we have that tell me that, it's kind of weird. I have trouble tracking all this, right? There have been hundreds of downloads of the software now, but I've only been talked to by about 5 people who tell me they're using it on a regular basis.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah. The two users that we have who told us that they put it into production are telling us for the moment their researchers are mostly using this they put data into iRODS at the end of the genomics processing string. They kind of keep it out in HPC land and deal with it till the end, and then they're pulling it in and curating it at that point through iRODS using our tool to add all the metadata that they want.
So their ingest is not automated?
I would imagine in some cases it is, but I don't have any direct evidence of that. Most of the people that I'm encountering are telling me that they're using it to store the stuff that are in their private research areas. There's probably archival work that's going on the big data dumps from the sequencers, but that would typically be automated by an iRODS rule run by the admin, an admin with an iRule operation, because there's already a special script anyhow.
Right.
So, now one of the other things that's also rather interesting about this that all of this group might appreciate a bit more, and then I'll try to ramp down and we can get into some Q&A. But when you get into looking at individual files and objects, one of the things that we ran into with this idea of the breadcrumb was how to let people work with and share data that they have access to, but they may not be able to get across the pathway with. For example, if I kind of take this first file here, I'll select it, and then let's say I want to come in and change the permissions to give another user or a group. I'll use a user. It's easier for me for this demonstration, but we want to add permission on this file for the non-RODS user on this machine, which is Tom New. But no one in the room is named Tom New. But if I want to add Tom to it, I can basically give him right ownership or whatever permission, but Tom cannot go up and down the breadcrumb tree to get from my directory to there. So the solution we put to this is to allow you to send someone a shared link. And I don't mean through the mail. I mean it puts it right into their iRODS implementation so that we can see it directly through our UI. So essentially, after I go through this adding up a permission, if I log out of my current iRODS account here, will I type the password correct? Yes. And I go in as Tom New. While he has a few files there, if I go down into the shared links, you'll see that he now has direct access to the file and can go look at the information on it. We can do this for users and groups. And by the way, to those of you who wrote before this, thank you very much for making this one of the most complicated things that I have seen in 35 years of working in this industry.
You're welcome.
I love the granularity of it, but when I grew up in the old Unix, System 5.4 days, and what you all did is much more intricate and granular than what I used to know.
So is the underlying implementation a ticket, or?
No, believe it or not, what we do is we change the permissions on it inside of the ICAT just as you would with the appropriate iadmin command, and then we go and query the properties on the files based upon your user ID.
Okay.
And the reason that we did that is because we knew that would hold security.
So
it's like the shares we have, where we had like where you share and it tags it with metadata as a share, so it appears as a. So we would call that like a virtual collection. You would have a shared virtual a collection that says show me everything that's shared with me by Tom New.
So where is it actually? Where is it kept? Where is that share kept?
The link share for us, we keep in our kit database.
Oh, yeah,
because it's not, but the permissions are in iRODS, and we go look those permissions up to decide what to show you.
Right.
But the link that's there, we store in the Metalnx database so that we,
Okay.
and I don't know that that was the wisest decision, but we decided to go that route when we were first getting into this, wanting to be sure that if you were running this side along with iRODS and you wanted to move it or change it, you could dump that whole database and pull it back in. In fact, for example, things like our templates, we export them as HTML format. We can import them as HTML and things of this nature, figuring that the really bright folks were going to want to make changes that we could not foresee. Get back up. Sorry. And the last thing I'll bother to mention that was a little bit of fun for us too was trash can management. Had a little bit of fun with that. We did finally, I think, get it right in the sense that if you're ready to get rid of your information, you can come click what you want, tell it to delete, It will run to the iRODS trash can, which we purposely buried at the bottom of the menu screen. And from here, you can go in and select individual things if you want to and move them back or replicate them or whatever you want to do. But when you're done, our crowning achievement was the empty the trash button.
We get it.
I know. Everybody else looks at me, why was this hard? Well, it was. But we actually managed to do it correctly and do not go around violating security premises to get it done. So we were very proud of ourselves when we got that part accomplished. I'm sitting here looking at the time, realize I've gone for a little bit over 45 minutes. So let me stop. You know, if there are any questions anybody has, I'm certainly welcome to take them.
Can you show the building of a tree of resources? I don't know if you clicked on that.
Yes. They'll be fake, though. Understand that, right?
Everything is alive in iRODS.
I've learned the hard way I can do this, but if I start playing with them on this, it will blow up very, very quickly.
Oh.
And it's not UI, iRODS gets very annoyed with me very, very quickly. But if I, for example, wanted, and actually I may not use my primary resource, if I wanted to come here and add a child, it would automatically bring me to the screen here. Let's call it round.
Oh, I see. It pre-populates the parent.
Yeah, I come in and basically come in and do round robin. Pardon me, I can't even read my own writing. There we go. We can put in a coordinating resource like this, attached to the zone, save it, and we'll
So
come back
it
to
dropped
this.
you into the same UI, but with just a couple things pre-populated.
Yeah, absolutely. But now I'm a little perplexed. That should put another link there, so we make a run into a bug, which would not surprise me.
Live demos is guaranteed.
No, this is actually the code we're testing right now, so I'm not at all surprised about this. We've been testing for 2 days, and we've got about 4 to go, so I'm not surprised to find a bug. Try letting it. Yep, no, it's a real bug. In normal mode, what would happen if I come in here? Let me try one from here. And I'll do it from the side.
I noticed you don't have any coordinating resources up there. You have some of these coordinating resources.
Oh, that could be. And I'm probably adding it at the wrong place. I'd be willing to bet money there's an error message we're not bringing it forward. Let's see if that works. Yeah, there we go. Doing it at the wrong level, self-inflicted wound. Sorry about that. But you know, from here, Terrell, if I wanted to, I could come in and do it from this screen, or you can do it from the other. It's taking you to the same place. But we could come in here and say, resource 1, we'll call it a unit file system. Sorry, you didn't see me click that shot.
Is it resource, a unit file system resource?
Should be, and this is going to create, I mean, this may blow up in my face. You have to pardon me. I've not tried it this way in quite a while.
Well, it'll still connect them.
It'll still warm up, yeah.
It won't do what you
It's not really going to do what you think it's going to do.
Okay, we do have a bug. It should be, there should be another indicator over here for the first resource on that. It's a bug. I apologize to everybody. I've not seen that in our testing yet. But, you know, if you'll let me go back to my presentation, I can at least show you what a fairly complicated one looks like. That picture.
I like to see Simons.
Yeah, here we go. We have built them out to as deep as 100 rows and 20 levels deep. The drawing utility that we're using here keeps up with it. Now, I'm not going to, you can't read it.
Does it zoom out?
Yeah, what we do is we zoom out with scrolls, so you can go in and around in it. But, you know, unfortunately, this is another open source library that tends to do this kind of widget map.
Yeah.
And after a while, it gets confused if it gets too too big.
Right, right.
Because in the back of it, I believe it's assuming it's got something like an HD TV screen, about 2,000 pixels on each dimension, and so it starts compressing things down as you get to many layers. We kind of went by this based on what I learned from you all early on. I don't know anybody who really builds things much more complicated than this.
And that storage use 33%.
Storage use 33% is a lie, and it's a lie for all the right reasons. In the world of the demos that I'm showing you tonight, I have everything stored on the vault drive, which is under root.
Okay.
And so if you come back over here and drill down, you go to the ICAT service, a good one, and I go and look at the actual root partition here, you'll see that it's already 55% full, mostly with the operating system. And because of the fact we're looking behind the scenes rather than running the ICAT to get the data itself, it unfortunately over-reports.
So I guess my question was, are those that graphic, the tree, you know, I kind of expected to see one of these little circles for each one.
Do it.
And or with quota information somewhere. You know, like how does that work? And
that's a grand idea. Well, the answer is we didn't think to do it.
Complicated, right? Yeah.
Well,
I just hadn't clicked on it before, so I didn't know.
Yeah, no, it's a great idea. I'll take it back to the team. We should consider it. It's not a bad idea, to be quite honest. The data comes from the same place. We have the remote monitoring daemon that sits on the different nodes, and basically we poke it, you know, with a command on well, we use port 8000, but it can be any port you want it to, and all it does is reports back what stat has to say. That way we don't have to run anything as root. We populate all this from that.
We spent some quality time solving that problem with the high water mark on the Excel system resource.
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, when I heard y'all were doing it, that's one of the reasons we didn't do a whole lot more in this space. I was waiting to kind of let you all get through it. We've talked about going back and tapping into that ourselves. But,
I was going to say, I don't know if I believe you do have the information. You may want to nerf your graph builder a bit so you can't add resources as children to leaf resources versus coordinating resources.
Good point.
It could save some heartache.
Yeah, that's a good point. We can go back and certainly do that. That's an easy change. So, who else? What else?
We encountered a wide variety of use cases. One of them with the National Archives is they had a site uploading a very large number of files over an unreliable network. So they had to have a mechanism which Mike implemented to track the status of each file coming from the client so that it could automatically restart them. Do you see anybody with that type of problem?
I thought I did when we started this. If you go actually pull the current code that's on Bentray and run it, we actually chunk the files and allow you to pause and restart them right now. But since we put that out, I have received such a large quantity of semi-negative feedback to where the version that I'm showing you tonight, we have ripped all that out, and we are just copying the files directly.
Why are they angry?
It adds about the act of chunking the file slows it down by about 2x. There are some libraries that we won't look at that will fix the problem somewhat, but I do not want to put them into this utility because then the scale out becomes a problem. We've been looking at possibly building a point-to-point client under the UI control to actually set up communication to the resource server from the point and using a high-speed chunking tool to go that route.
We had the inverse problem. They're moving small files, but they're moving 100,000, 200,000 files at a time, and some of them wouldn't make it because of network reliability. And they didn't want to have to figure out which files fit. They wanted the system to do it for them.
In our previous implementation, that was not a problem. When you started the utility backup, we were leaving the information behind, and we would have just continued to upload from there. But, you know.
So you can make a version of that that periodically would synchronize from one area back into the iRODS data.
You could. I'm giving you this weird look, Reagan, because of the fact that I've learned the hard way over time that synchronization is in the eye of the beholder. Two-way synchronization invariably makes somebody unhappy, And if you're going to do one-way synchronization, you have to decide very early on who is master and who is slave. I've been involved in a number of projects over the years trying to do two-way synchronization, and invariably somebody gets a timestamp wrong and data gets lost. I'm not a fan of it.
So if the client is the master, because that's what you're trying to synchronize into the data.
I agree with you, but if I were a system administrator, I would write that script and I would tell you that because my server is doing the work, it's the master. And that's where the confusion starts.
Another capability was users who wanted to be able to generate their own reports.
Mm-hmm.
Give me, basically, I want to tailor a status report on metadata or files or some aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody wanted a different report.
Yes, that's an area where I have, at this point, chosen to wait till I start getting more feedback from different customers. What we can do at this point is that we can, for example, CSV export file list where we can export the metadata out of objects that you might be interested in. But I've chosen at this stage not to try and do coagulated reports because of that very issue. The people that we have interacted with so far have been telling us that those two features are the things they want the most, and the rest of it usually involves what you two were talking about, searching through the metadata search engine to find individual items. But, you know, for example, let me, I haven't done this in a while, so I have to make sure I'm doing this right.
So that menu was populated based on the, it was searching for permissions?
Yeah, we figured out the hard way that we have to go back to the ICAT to check permissions, because if we try caching them locally, invariably we're now trying to become the source of truth, and it leads to bad results as well every time.
Validation.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like it would still be, there's still a window, it's just a smaller window for being out of date.
Agreed. The reason that we did not do anything in that space is not because I'm trying to be lazy, but if I do that, remember, this is a browser. Like in fact, when we were designing this, we were trying to design it so the same interface works on a PC or a tablet. And so then the issue becomes resource consumption. The more things I do like that in the browser means the less space there is for downloading larger files or larger number of files, because it all competes against the same space. You know, by the way, I mean, if it's something that's needed, this is feedback I love to get, because we can make adjustments. But you know, in the work we did earlier, and we were talking to people that we knew, they were telling us these features were the way they wanted. I don't try to pretend this is the best set of features. Cesar, I'm sure you've gotten other and different requests as well for the cloud browser.
Yeah.
So
Here and there, yeah.
But you know, case in point, let me go pull the metadata. I can demonstrate this really quickly. You know, for example, if you wanted to get the metadata out, we can export it to a CXV file, and it'll be ready for editing when it comes out the other end. And you can use it, you know, as you want to, and do the same thing with file lists and things of this nature. But, you know, Reagan, I guess what I would come from, if you know that there are standardized reports that people really need, other than the marriage of metadata tags and file system properties you all talked about, I'd love to hear it. I've reacted to what we've heard from, you know, real customers that we've talked to. This has been pretty much it for the moment.
If you have a group that wants to define a new method for extracting metadata, how would they go about doing it?
Write the appropriate microservice, load it into the plugins directory, and so long as it's file suffix based, it will work immediately.
On the machine where Metalnx is running.
No, you've got to put it on. We're using iRODS. You've got to go put it on the resource service.
All of them.
You want it to be consistent.
Yeah, yeah.
That's why we did that little metadata service thing up here. And I'd have to show you. I'd probably need to get Arthur to explain this to you all, but what we've ended up doing is that we defined a rule that we've applied with this revision a rule and a microservice that will now go into microservices we provide and actually respond to certain tag code words to tell us what the name of the microservice is and its revision and so forth, so that we can actually build this population list.
So if the microservices already existed and the administrator wrote a rule, then how would you register that rule as the new thing that generates your report?
Well, in that case, you'd have to register it just, well, and take it back. Inside of our UI, there's actually a little piece of code down in the services layer that we call our individual microservices from. That's how we know where they are, right? I mean, it's the same kind of concept you all use inside of iRODS. But once you've made that change, recompiled this, then the rest of it can be added on the fly. It turns out that for metadata extraction, at least for what we're doing so far, we just basically have done what you all did with the 4.2 training example, right? We're keying off the file suffix, .jpeg, .dam, .cram, whatever it is. And we run through our appropriate microservice, depending on what that is. So I don't know how to phrase it. It's not particularly hard to add. You just have to copy amendment code and move on.
So the hope is that eventually you'll have a full suite of microservices and all you're doing are modifying rules instead of having to write code.
That would be my ideal scenario, but what we've encountered so far, I mean, I'll give you the example. If you go look at our implementation of the VCF extractor, you will discover there's a little bit of a logic engine in there that makes an attempt to guess what people meant in their interpretation of the VCF format, because it's not static or consistent. And if you get the appropriate VCF file, you'll find that sometimes we have pulled something we think is an attribute and put it in the attribute field, but then the next thing we pick as the value might actually be a description because the actual value is in the unit location. Without more artificial intelligence, there's not much more we can do with that. Not that I'm not interested in it, but I'm at the point now where I need either a partner or a customer to help us define that because we don't have enough of the full domain knowledge.
That's what Nero did with the info typer.
Yeah, I was going to, one of the things we're running into is the more we try to make things usable, the more assumptions you start building into the environment.
Yep.
For example, even a simple thing like, what is the freaking MIME type of this file? That implies like a whole workflow, a whole chain of things to determine the MIME type of the file beyond just looking at the extension, right?
I didn't do that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so that's I think that's the tension we have right now.
Yeah, it's always.
Yeah. I don't know if that's a question. I'm just throwing that out there.
No.
But even stuff like,
Get into therapy now.
yeah, you know.
Yeah, it's unfortunately a real problem.
And you know, things like how do you record the MIME type? Can there be more than one? Or do you have a handle? Is it a handle, or is it EIP or a data site or things like that? So starting to come to some agreement about how to characterize these objects that we're holding in a way that you could point Metalnx at this guy's grid or this organization's grid and have it work, right?
Yeah. Right.
And interpret that.
You know, you're getting directly into the conversation that we all want to be having more about dealing with data validation anyhow, right? Some of you have seen some of this from me before. This is the latest instantiation as to where we are on trying to actually handle some level of data validation. And I'm hoping that I'll have the dictionary concept we created here for too much longer. But what we've been doing is we literally, if you'll take a look at this particular metadata tag here, we basically have been looking at the idea of using our UI to create data types, ranges, things of this nature, which we're encoding into additional iRODS metadata values that we are burying in the ICAT with a unique file name system we came up with so that we don't get confused with them with everybody else's tags, and then we're filtering them out on this instance. When you see this here, we've actually gone and looked up two tags, the actual metadata tag that you're seeing, plus the, if you will, the data validation piece that we've stored away in a second tag.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to get some concept around that, and the next piece that we're looking at now is actually building what I will call a two-layer dictionary structure. Basically, the owner of a collection can define a dictionary. We're assuming one will be at the zone level for the overall system, and then a user can define a second one somewhere down their chain, and we'll basically marry those two together, and that will become the attribute list you can pick from to either define attributes in templates or to add attributes into your ICAD, if you will, if that dictionary is locked, the system is locked on those dictionaries.
Are you looking at organizing the templates so that, like, you have Dublin core metadata? That's like a grouping.
Yeah, the only thing that, well, should we phrase this carefully? I know that there's work we will want to do about presenting how those templates come to you based upon classifications. We haven't added yet because it's not hard to do. The piece that I've not done yet that we would want is what I call template chaining.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fairly easy thing to add, but I did not do it because I'm kind of waiting to let real customers come back and tell me, well, we needed to do it this way versus that, because I can think of 3 ways to do this, and so far I don't have anyone pushing us. But yes, it's a fairly easy thing to add from where we're at right now. What we would do in that, if you went back into the template list here, basically what we would do would be to add another column in here that would, we were already tracking version numbers, figuring we might have to come back at some point and add the ability to backtrack out of version or to have a version chain, or a chain be a version. So anyway, we've left the core data under here, but the piece we did not do is actually allow you to put a way to put the chain number on a sequence. Like it was just going to be another column. We would mark the master and then the chain numbers and basically allow a set of binary trees, if you will, so a different template to follow on different trees for execution.
How about things like link data and microformat, like RDFA and stuff like that? Are you looking at embedding any of that sort of stuff in any of these?
Not at this point, and I'll be honest with you, the reason why I'm not, because I'm interested, but when I talk to people that keep telling us what they want, dealing with the data validation dictionary, I need to add direct ticket support, which is really easy to do with our shared link concept, but I need to do those 3 things first before I go branching out into what I will call, and I don't mean this offensive to those of you in Cyverse, because I know you care passionately about it right now, but it's a minor detail to me.
Sure, sure. Well, part of that is like this idea of creating like a canonical HTTP dereferenceable representation of a collection or a data object as a thing that you could then assign a DOI to and publish to the world. That's where ways of expressively putting metadata into that representation becomes really interesting.
Right.
So, yeah, so like the concept of here's your canonical HTTP version of this object that you give to the world. And what that looks like.
Yeah, and I know that we've thought about it. I know I can do it with the kind of structuring that we have, but I wouldn't recommend it, because what I would prefer to see done as an iRODS advocate would be to come back and find a way to take the logical pieces that make up that entity and turn it into a virtual object. Well, I don't want to say virtual collection, I mean an actual physical virtual object that would be defined under iRODS control, so that there is a version of truth about the members of the object, their revision numbers, and their permissions.
Might be something cool to talk about later. I don't know if I fully understood that.
Okay, yeah.
Like a virtual data object or a virtual?
I would call it a virtual object from the iRODS point of view, but it would have to be operated on as a physical object. And I'll give you the case scenario where the issue could occur. Is that if I were, for example, building a bunch of information, again, bear in mind, I'm looking at this from a corporate point of view, not a public research point of view, but if I built a set of information that I needed to keep as a logical entity for business purposes in my house, but there was a portion of this I wanted to, say, push out to Dataverse, right? I need a way to be able to keep track of a logical collection and identify which portions can be made public versus which ones cannot be made public, and that be automated under security control, done by iRODS rules.
I got you now. So like back in the old Fedora 3, they had that disseminator concept, where you would write a disseminator that, so you wouldn't store the data, but you would relate it to a disseminator that would, at the time of request, could dynamically present the disseminated image.
Full model or push. I'm thinking push, but it's
Yeah, well, you could do it either way.
right. Exactly.
That's your dip.
Right, but what people are, and this is the reason I kind of come back to, again, the same point about apples on metadata, right? People want, security kind of concepts are so painful that people want systems, even if they make assumptions, to automate that for them so they're protected. All they really want to do is to be able to use it, and if it doesn't work, complain at you at the administrator that it doesn't do what they expected. But at least they know that it's secure. Sorry, I'm down in a raffle now.
I think your group is doing a wonderful job. This is looking pretty tight.
It's getting there. The nice part is we're getting a fair amount of feedback now from some real users. Again, I don't know exactly how many users it's deployed with. I know we have one group in New Zealand that's about 85 users right now, and I understand there's another university over in Europe that's got about 25 active people on it. Inside of the house, those of us who play with, there's probably another 50 users there. So it's getting there. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
How long does it take to install?
If you're doing it straight from our binaries that we have posted on bin tray, and you follow the instructions, probably 20 minutes. In fact, I'll give you an example. Today, the 3-node environment you're seeing was running the actual binary image that was that is out on bin tray right now. I pulled it out, changed the RMD, the actual web application, and the MSI packages, including having to rebuild SAM tools and all the other stuff, in about 22 minutes. And by the way, you would say, "Oh, you know what you're doing." No, I was reading our instructions as I was doing it, because I can never remember this stuff. This is something, an area, though, that we've been taking a look at. We've actually been thinking about trying to put together an Ansible package that would actually deploy all the components directly. Some folks that we've talked with who won't do that would love it, but then they are not sure themselves that they would know how to point an Ansible script at each one of the nodes correctly. So we've been playing with it in the lab, but I haven't yet prepared myself to deal with the onslaught of potential issues from there. At least I know when people write and tell us they have trouble, we usually know how to help them at this point. Anything else? If not, I feel like I'm keeping people away from getting home to either see kids or watch football or basketball. We're in that part of the
year. Or do chores.
Do chores.
No, I think that's great. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you all very much. Appreciate you letting me come and talk. This has been a lot of fun. And I really love all the feedback. There's also some great ideas. Thank you.